My name is Lila Jane Warner, and we're presently sitting at the St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Hazelton, North Dakota.
Do you live in Hazelton?
I live on a farm 3 miles east of Hazelton on Highway 34. I'm not on a working farm. I have a nephew who does my farm work.
How did you get the farm? Was it in your family?
Yes, I inherited it from my father and mother.
Did you grow up on that farm?
No, I did not grow up on that farm. Actually, it's the fourth place that I can remember living on. During the Depression, we moved from one farm to another farm to another farm to another farm until we finally ended up on this farm. I was born on a farm that was called McDonald's Farm.
And that farm was where?
About 6 miles east of, about 6 miles north of Hazelton, straight north of Hazelton. And my brother was born there, my sister was born there, and I was born there, all on October 24th, at different years. We were not triplets.
And is that all your siblings?
That was all our siblings.
So did all of you work on the farm, have chores on the farm?
Yes, from the time that I can remember, there was always something for us to do. When we were younger, it was gathering eggs, feeding the chickens, feeding the bottle lambs. When I was in second grade, they taught me how to milk cows. And you couldn't find me underneath the cow. I was so small. And I couldn't hold the pail because it was too heavy. And I did not want anyone else to beat me. So I milked vigorously and had the pail on the floor. And by the time I was through, it was all full of foam. And so they had to let it sit for a while so they could get the milk into the separator. And we had to pick the potato bugs off the potatoes. We had to clean the garden, and that meant knowing the difference between a carrot plant or a weed. And we hoed, we raked, and then we also had to dig out the potatoes. We helped our folks to do that. As we grew older, it was carrying 5-gallon pails to the pigs. We shocked grain. We pitched bales. We sat on the roof and shingled the roof, and that's a mighty steep roof. We painted. I can't think of anything we didn't do. We also butchered chickens, canned all the vegetables. Anything I guess another farm girl do, we did.
How about, you said you had a brother as well as sisters. Did you have different chores because you were a girl?
Well, my brother mostly did the more difficult things like driving the little 4-H tractor. We weren't allowed to do that. At least we weren't supposed to. But he would, and he would go out and plow. He would disc. He would cultivate. He helped mow the grass. That is something, when I say grass, I mean the hay fields. Now, my sister and I did rake with the old dump rake. One time I was driving the tractor and she was hooked up to the rake, and pretty soon I got to thinking, gee, this feels different. And I turned around and looked, and the bolt had come out of the hitch, and she was sitting back there on the rake just going nowhere, and I was still going with the tractor. So she was not happy. But we got over it.
So in your pecking order of the siblings, where were you?
I was the baby of the family.
So were you the spoiled one?
I never considered myself spoiled. We all had work to do, and I could never say that when my folks did anything for us children, it was, to me, equal. I never felt like my brother got more than we did or that I got more than they did. It was just shared, I mean, more basically, and so was the work on the farm, and we all felt this is what we did to be able to survive. And we never had a lot of money. We never had a lot of material things. I always said we never had many M&Ms, but we sure had a lot of love and support from our family.
Did you know the Depression was going on? Did you feel the effects of it?
I can't really say that the Depression was something that I noticed. I think because everybody else around us lived the same way. Nobody had a lot of this or that. And the one thing I do remember about the Depression was when our family would drive to different families, we would see fences that the sand had just covered over the top. So I knew that part of the Depression, the Dust Bowl part. But as far as being considered poor, I never considered myself poor.
So the Dust Bowl was really in effect up here.
Yes, it was just toward the end when that I can remember it. It probably was more the result of the Dust Bowl more than the Dust Bowl itself. I can't remember any time that there was a lot of. Well, I can remember some of the grasshopper days when the people would go out and spray their fence rows and things like that. But as far as the wind blowing, the dust blowing, that I can't remember. Just more or less the results.
Do you remember your parents talking about conditions at all?
They talked about, my folks did talk about the Depression, but they never harbored on it. It was like, this is life, and this is the way it is. And it was not like they wanted to put I'm going to say like a burden on us. That's why I say we never knew we were poor. We never knew how hard it was for my folks because they felt, I think they were people of faith, so they just accepted life as it was. And so they never brought it on us.
But you said you moved to a lot of different farms. Was that because of economic conditions?
I would say because they didn't own anything. You know, when my folks got married, my father came from eastern North Dakota, and my mother was from here. All my father got from his family was a few $100s so he could buy a team of horses and a plow. My mother from her family, she got 6 cows, a kitchen table, and a stove, and a bed. And that's how they began their life. So they didn't really have any money, and then they got married in 27. Well, then things started getting poorer and poorer, and so there wasn't hardly any money there. So then my folks would move from one farm to the other because just at the time they probably were getting settled in that one farm and cleaning up the house and everything, somebody bought the farm. So then they had to move to another farm. And finally they did get to the farm that where I live today, and that was, I think, through the government federal program where they could buy land or something quite reasonable. And so that's how we got to that. And by that time, the war came, so that brought good prices, and the Depression was over. So they were able to buy the farm and made many, many improvements on it.
What do you remember about World War II and how farm life might have changed because of World War II?
Well, my father did not have to go. My father during World War II did not have to go was not drafted because he was a farmer. We did not have much gas. Only the farmers, they got gas for farming. but you didn't get a lot of gas for anything else. Same thing with tires. We did not get to go to anything extra because you had to watch it. And I remember the stamps that you could only buy so many pounds of sugar. And sometimes they had what was it, saccharin, I believe it was, as a substitute for sugar. And then so you had to do canning with different things. I can remember one time that it was said over the radio that you were to pull your shades down that night, and we had to buy the shades that were darkened on one side. And then we had to pull the shades down at a certain time because it was sort of like a test to make sure there were no lights showing anywhere in the area. So that basically that's what I do remember about World War II.
Did you know any people who served in World War II?
Yes, I had some cousins that served in World War II, and my brother wasn't old enough, of course, so he did not have to serve, but he did serve later, post-war. And I don't recall that we had any relatives that we lost during World War II, but just more or less served during World War II in Germany. And so my sister did a lot of writing to people that she knew that were in the service.
You would have been a little young for the writing?
I'm sorry?
You would have been a little young to write to soldiers?
I remember I was in third grade when we were listening to the radio when the news came over that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And so you would just listen to the radio and listen to the news, or if you went to a movie, you got to see the eyes of the world showing you all what was going on overseas. And so that would be we never got a newspaper because we couldn't afford that. So we just would always see it on the radio, hear it on the radio, what was going on.
What language was spoken at home?
English. My folks spoke English at home, but when they didn't want us to know something, they spoke German. Now they did that for a while, but then pretty soon my brother caught on, and so then they had to stop speaking German. My folks felt that when my mother went to school, she could not speak English. She had a hard time in school. And my dad could speak both English and German. And they decided that if there were ever any children born, that they would only speak English because they did not want us to go through what they went through when they went to school, and my mother couldn't talk English. There was a lot of ridicule. And they were almost like accused of being, conspirators or something because they were German, because of their German ancestry. So they did not want us to go through that. And so they spoke English.
Didn't want the kids to get picked on?
I'm sorry?
They did not want the kids to get picked on?
No, my family did not want us children to go to school and get picked on. My mother told of stories of how they would be picked on at school. And sometimes they bullied back by when some of these kids would come out at recess time and they'd have their coats on and they'd have really nice clothes and stuff, and they didn't. Well, they would take them down and sort of pull their buttons off their coat or something just to get even, because they were not happy, But I have to say that we didn't have to go through that.
What were your parents' thoughts about education and education for a girl?
My father got to go through the third grade in education. My mother never got to finish the 8th grade. And she went to a country school because her oldest brother died when he was 9 years old. So that meant she was the oldest one in the family. So during her 8th grade, she had to stay home and help plow. So she never got to graduate from 8th grade. Like I said, my father went through the 3rd grade. But they thought that education was very important. And there was no difference as far as my brother getting more education than us girls. It was meant the same for all 3 of us kids. And my brother finished high school, and then he went into the Air Force. My sister and I both finished high school here in Hazelton, North Dakota. And then I went on to Valley City State Teachers College to become a teacher. And I was the first one on my father's side and my mother's side to graduate from college. But after that, there were many cousins that followed in line. And so then I started teaching school when I was 17 years old out at the country school. Anytime we had anything in school, in our high school age or even grade school, if something that we participated in, my family always was there to support us. I mean, that was very much encouraged. They felt they were denied it, so they wanted us to have the best.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about getting started in teaching? 17 seems awfully young to be in the classroom.
When I was 17, of course, there wasn't money to go to school, to college. But you could go for 8 weeks of summer school and at the college. Then you could get a permit to teach out in the country, which I never understood. You might have 8 grades, but 17 years of age, that was okay. But in the city or town, you had to have at least 2 years to teach 1 grade. So they must have figured we were pretty smart if we could handle, all 8 grades. But I went for 8 weeks to summer school. And then because there was a shortage of teachers, the country school boards were allowed by the state to hire someone like me that had only gone to 8 weeks of summer school but was not old enough to be certified to give me a permit. And so that's what I did. I went out and I went to a country school that had 7 kids and 6 grades. I had a 1st grader, a 3rd grader, a 4th grader, a 5th grader, a 6th grader, and 2 7th graders. And I always said that I learned more in that 1 year of teaching than I did probably going to summer school because the kids were anxious to learn. I had complete support from the parents. The kids gave me no grief. I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything better. I mean, I don't know if I would have ever continued on to be a teacher if I did not have that particular school and those particular kids. I always give them credit because they were the best, I always thought.
So what school was it?
I taught my first year about 7 miles east of Hazelton. It was called the Lincoln School or the Beasler School. And I had 4 Beasler kids. And there was 2 Oldhauser kids and 1 Seville. Those were my students. And well, sometimes in the wintertime when it got cold, we pushed our desks aside and we had permission from the school board. We were able to roller skate inside the schoolhouse. The kids tried to teach me how to ride a bike. They gave up. They said I was a hopeless case. We played ante over the barn, and we played softball, and they would not let the first grader do rollers. They were teaching him how to strike that ball across the plate, and it was they all worked together. They really helped each other out, and I always said it was like you had those kids that maybe needed help, but they could listen to the other class and learn something. And my first grader never got into trouble because when he was done with his work, he was listening to what was going on in the grades up above him. And by the Christmas time, he was beating his third grade sister on doing flashcards. And so, I mean, it was a good experience, and I taught there 2 years. Then I went to Dr. Martin Luther College in Minnesota for 1 year, but I came back and taught 2 more years at that school. And from there, let's see, where did I go? I think I went to Wishick and taught at Wishick. And I had 5th grade and 3rd grade there. I loved that too. That was a good German community. So, yeah, but I couldn't speak German to those people. And I can remember walking down the streets of Wishick, going to the store or something, and they'd be talking German, you know. And I wasn't used to that because Hazelton, that was not necessarily, you might once in a while. Lytton, that was more frequently that you heard people talking German on the street. Then when I left Wishick, I went to Ireton, Iowa, taught there 1 year. Then back up to northern Minnesota, to the range, Iron Ore Range, Great Lakes, Minnesota. Then after that, I liked moving around. I didn't like staying in one place. Neither did I like teaching the same grade all the time, because that was boring. I wanted to have more of a challenge. Then I went down to Owatonna, Minnesota, where the industry is. Then from there, I went to the Department of Defense and taught in Libya, Africa, and I came with Gaddafi. I was there 1 week, and then there was the coup. But after that, everything, I mean, it was okay. My friends and I would go off base, although they really did not encourage that. We never had any problem. After that, we had to leave by May, so then I went to Germany and taught in southern Germany. And I was there for about 3.5, 4 years. Came back, and I said, oh, I need some R&R. So I went west of Hazelton on 1804 to a school called Telfer. And it was a 2-room country school, and I had the upper grades. Again, a wonderful experience because these farm kids are something else, you know, and their parents are supportive. So I really enjoyed that too, and it was R&R. From there, I went down to New Mexico and taught with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I taught on 2 different pueblos. Loved the kids. I loved the kids. And after 43 years of teaching, I decided this is time to quit. And there was a change in how they wanted you to teach, how much they wanted you to teach. Every time you turned around, there was another new philosophy or something like that. I like the old school philosophy out in the old country school where I could just plain teach and I was interrupted with something. And I wasn't always in favor of new ideas. So they called me the dinosaur.
Where was the last place you taught?
I'm sorry?
The last place you taught?
The last place I taught was at San Felipe Pueblo, north of Albuquerque, about 15 miles. And that San Felipe, of course, means St. Philip. I had, one year I taught third grade, another year I taught second grade, another year I taught fourth grade, and the last year I taught just second grade. But because I always said I can't stand teaching the same reading story over and over and over again without, I needed challenge to get really excited about the story, about how could I, if I was teaching it for 10 years in a row or whatever. So about every third year I'd say, may I go to another level, because I just didn't enjoy teaching the same thing over and over again.
Is there a reason why you moved back then to Hazleton?
When I retired, I decided that I would come back to Hazleton because I was thinking that both of my parents would still be here. But toward the end of my teaching career, I lost both my parents, and that I was going to move back onto the farm. At that time, my brother lived there at a mobile home with his wife, who was disabled, and so I decided to move back to North Dakota, where my family was, where I had no family in the New Mexico area, although I had many, many good friends. But I thought I'd be more helpful back here in North Dakota.
And that was how long ago?
Let's see, how long ago was that? I don't know if I want to.
Do you remember what year that was?
Yeah, I retired in 1995, so that's 23 years ago that I retired back here to North Dakota. And at first it was good because I was still young. I could do things. I started out with, having a garden and doing all kinds of things. But in the meantime, I had 2 heart attacks and had stents put in and, all kinds of good health problems. But now I don't have a garden anymore, but
You're still active in the community.
yeah, I try to do things in the community. Like I belong to the Senior Citizens Group and to the Hazleton Historical Society. And the Hazleton Historical Society purchased the first post office in Hazleton. It was a woman's house. And of course, at that time, a business or a house or something, that's where the post office was. It's not a very big house, and it was in ruin. But if you saw it today, you'd have to admit that there was a lot of work done on that. And we tried to have people bring in things that have historic value, that go back a long time. We have 4 great-granddaughters of the first postmaster in Hazleton. When I say first postmaster, she was a woman in 1903. And so every summer for the last 20 years, these girls have been coming back to Hazleton to share memories about their great-grandmother. And one is from Colorado, and 3 are from Minnesota. And so we have to do many things in order to collect money, in order to keep the building up. And we also purchased another building because we have so many things that people have donated to us that we don't want to lose it. And I just hope we can get the younger people to remember that we need to keep this history. Otherwise, it's going to be gone.
What do you think the importance of heritage is to communities like this?
Well, let's see. I guess those of us who started thinking we needed to preserve our history here in Hazleton is that if you don't know your past, you don't have much chance even with your future, because you don't have no commitment to either to the values of that community, the values of the people, the values of whatever they have. I know we've gone to school once and talked to the kids. Now, some of the children were really interested, and the other ones cared less. And we had some that came and helped us in the museum to carry things, to put things away, take things out of storage and so forth. And some of them they were so interested in what they were carrying that they forgot that that's what they were supposed to be doing. And we'd have to remind them, well, we got to keep going. And they were interested. Again, there were those that cared less. Like I said, if you don't know your past, there's no future to me, to us, or to them. That's my thinking.
When you were growing up as a kid on the farm, did you learn how to cook? Did Mom take you in and learn how to cook? Were you more involved in field work?
Well, when we were growing up, my mother did teach us how to cook. But our German cooking was so much different than the Germans from Russia, although my mother was German from Russia. I always said my mother's Nifla soup wasn't like anything anybody else had. And I think maybe because we lived around a lot of people that were not German, and so that there was a lot of, what should I say, criticism, ridicule about the German food. If you had, all those krauts, those kraut people, and so forth. So I think my mother was a little careful she didn't really teach us a lot of the German food cooking. Dampfnudler, yes. Fry bread, yes. And we all loved it. And like I said, her Nifla soup was different than anybody else's, but hardly anybody around here made Nifla soup in our area. Kuchen, yes, and that we loved. We loved the Kuchen. My dad was as good a cook as my mother, because when he grew up, he worked in lumber camps in northern Minnesota. So when my mother had to be gone at any time, we didn't worry because we'd be well fed. My mother, I can remember, she did teach us, we had to learn how to kill the chicken, how to butcher it, how to clean it. And I can remember one time they were out making hay, and the Sears Roebuck Company had come to put a furnace in our house. Well, my sister and I was second grade, she was third grade. So we went out and we killed a chicken, and we gutted it and got it all ready, and we floured it and sort of fried and put it in the oven, because we thought, well, we need to feed these men, right? And we put potatoes on and so forth. But the thing we forgot, we didn't cook it long enough. And so it was still sort of doughy chicken. But those Sears Roebuck men, they were just so nice to us because we had, tried to make them a meal. But after that, my mother taught us how to really do it so that we would have it. So after that, we were always cooking when they would be going out in the field. We didn't have a refrigerator, so we made Jell-O, and we put it in a quart jar, and we tied a string around it, and we went outside, opened up the well hole, and put that string in that quart jar right down beside that pipe, because our water was ice cold, and by noon we could pull up the Jell-O. We also would put down a quart of cream so that we could make whipped cream and put it on the Jell-O, and that helped us out, And that was something else we did. We did a lot of canning. When you went into the basement in the fall of the year, There was canned sausage, canned beef, canned chicken, and probably 100 quarts of green beans and 100 quarts of carrots and all kinds of vegetables. So when the young people today talk about instant food, we said, well, we had that back in our day, because all we did, you got company, you went downstairs and got all this instant food, and you had it. It didn't take you as long as it did maybe putting it into the microwave, and it was good food.
Your mother had a very different background and upbringing than you, but do you see your mother as, was she a role model for you when you were growing up?
I believe that my mother was somebody that I had great respect for, because she tried to provide for us girls. She would sacrifice for herself, for just so that we could have something, even if it was like maybe a new dress for a school play or something like that. She would sacrifice something that maybe she was hoping she was going to have. So I had great respect for my mother. And she also would take newspapers or brown bags and cut patterns out of them and make patterns and sew on the old treadle machine, just so we could have something. Maybe it wasn't always new. Maybe it was some old material that somebody had given my mother, and she turned it into something so that we could have something. I have made this statement many times. I felt that I regretted many things I did in my life, but one thing I really regretted is that I never took the effort to see to it that my folks could have taken a GED and have gotten their high school diploma. Because to me, they were wise, and you would have thought they went to college, because their experiences that's where they got their education. And I always felt they were so much better educated than I was. And so I did regret that. And I had great respect for both my dad and my mother, because they both would go there, anything they could do to make sure that we were okay and that we could survive in this world. And that included, of course, bringing us to church. That was important too.
No, talk about that, the church being important in the life of people, your family and people at that time.
I believe that back when my parents were growing up, that having a faith was something that brought them through everything. The good and the bad, the sad, the wonderful. And they would help out their neighbors because of that. If their neighbor had a tragedy, they tried to go and help them. If a neighbor has gotten sick over the winter and could not put in his grain or something, I'll call it the modern day farm rescue program, because they would probably have 4 or 5 tractors going up and down the field. Where were the women? They were making the meals to feed these people. But I don't know if they would have done that if they wouldn't have had that faith, that was part of what their faith was. And of course, they took us to church, and they taught us to provide for the church, and that when we went someplace else, that we found the church. And of course, we knew too that if there was nothing there, that didn't mean that there wasn't a place. You still had your faith. And so my mother was raised and confirmed in the Lutheran Church in southwestern Emmons, not like Emmons County, west of Lytton. And my dad, of course, came from Cavalier, and then that's where he was confirmed and baptized. He was only 6 weeks old when he came across, so he doesn't remember anything about Poland because he had 4 older brothers, and then later on there were others in the family. My mother came from of 9, and then she lost a brother. But both families, it was very important. Well, the whole neighborhood was that way. They may not have all been, there were Lutherans, there were Catholics, there were Baptists, there were Methodists, but the churches were full because they just, that faith was very important. But today we have a lot of our families, they don't have big families anymore. Families have, their fathers and mothers have died. Others have moved to Bismarck to retire and live in a retirement home. So the churches are getting smaller and smaller, and it becomes very difficult to support the smaller congregations. No longer, it's harder and harder to support those churches and the pastor and keep up the church because it's not cheap, or even just keeping the furnace going in the wintertime, the fuel and things like that. Now this past 2 years, we put a steel roof on our church. And because we had a lot of leakage going on and there was a lot of destruction, but it was amazing how people dug deep to put that roof on the church because we certainly don't want to lose it. But who knows? Someday, we do have 3 little ones in church, and we're all happy, and we like it when they cry because we know that there is still life here.
Where do you think you got your wanderlust from?
Why did I like to move around a lot? I'm not really sure. I guess I'm going to go.
Can I have you take your hand up?
Oh.
Yours on the microphone, I'm sorry.
When I was in 3rd grade, we had a reading book that was called If I Were Going. And in there was story after story about Mr. Sanders going from here to there and so forth. And the one place, or 2 places that he went to that intrigued me was he went to North Africa and he rode a camel. Oh, that was very interesting to me. And then another book story he had was that he went to Switzerland and he went up high into the mountains and he watched this boy taking care of the cows, and he ran, and I'll never forget the word, pell-mell after those cows. Well, those 2 things really fascinated me in his story. Also in our 3rd grade room was an old National Geographic magazine, and I loved looking at the pictures. So I was going through the pages, and here I saw the picture of Petra in the Near East. And I thought, oh, now that's an interesting place. Well, I never got to see Petra, but I did get to go to North Africa. I did not ride a camel, though, and I did get to Germany, and I got to see the cows come down the mountain and them putting the flowers and the bells on to see who, and they would give an award to the cow who gave the most milk. And so I got to see that. And my friends would tease me because they said, only Lila would go to see the cows come down the mountain. Well, it's part of their culture. So my dad, when I said I was going to North Africa and had been accepted from the Department of Defense, he said he thought that was okay. My mother was not so sure. And yet I was amazed because it would have been my father that I thought would have said, no, don't do that. And my mother would have said, yes, you go while you can. And so when my father sort of, said, go and do it, I was really shocked. But Ben Barrett was the county agent at the time, and he had a daughter who was been working in Liberia at the time, and she came home and showed some slides, and things were not good in Liberia at the time. And my folks went down there to watch these slides, and then they called and said, I don't know if you should be going or not. And I said, well, I'd already said yes, and I wasn't going to go back on my word. And but they helped me get everything lined up so I could go. And then the last year I was there before I returned, I was able to bring them over to Germany. And my mother always said she thought that the farthest, if she would ever get out of the state of North Dakota, that would have been something. But for her to have that trip to Germany, and while we went into Switzerland and so forth, she didn't think that would ever happen in her lifetime. In fact, she wasn't going to go. And the people around here said, you have to go. You need to go, Well, okay, they talked her into it, and after she came back, she said, you know what? Dad and I talked about that we would like to have gone back again. And they completely loved it, So, no, I'm not sure where like I said, I think those two stories in the National Geographic, I just, I wanted to see what was on the other side.
Getting back to this side, when you're teaching in the country schools, what type of experience was that? And once again, being at such a young age.
Well, the first day I went out to teach in the country school, they really don't prepare you for that at college, and I went in and I said to my sister, why don't you, it wasn't her, she taught school too, but she wasn't starting yet. Her school wasn't ready to start. So I said, why don't you come with me so that you can sort of give me some ideas So I was explaining a lot of things to the kids, passing out books, and getting pretty close to the half day was over with and the kids could go home. And my sister whispered to me, why don't you tell the kids what your name is? I had even forgotten how to do that. I had students that had a difficult time in reading. Well, I only had 8 weeks of summer school, and I don't think there was anything about reading how to teach this child. So I'd think about what could I do. And I remember I took one of those little cards, and I cut a hole in there, and I would make him just read one word at a time so that he wouldn't worry about the next word. And so slowly he improved in his reading. Well, when I went to summer school the next summer, they brought that up about how you could do that. Well, you learn how to do it. You have to think, what can I do? With discipline, I really didn't have to worry because there wasn't any. We did whatever you had to do. I remember one time I had given a test to the kids, and one of the kids in the 6th grade, and he had written down on there, I asked him about what caused rain. And he said on there, because God opened the zipper on the clouds. Well, I didn't want to get too much on his case, but he he just, well, he didn't do anything else about it, but, and I had this same boy who had difficulty reading. I had him do a diagram or a diorama or something that he would bring dirt and trees and stuff and make little things to see if he could improve his wanting to learn more. He was a farm kid, and boy, he loved farming, but he wasn't interested in doing anything with the reading or math or anything like that. And so trying really hard to get him to be interested in that type of thing. We had our Christmas programs, and the kids would put curtains up. They would do the work. They would help them do all this work and so forth. And they were interested in what they were learning. Where I would say today it's a little different because it's a different type of learning. Everything there was hands-on or using concrete things. And for today, there's too much technology. And I'm glad to hear that the Silicon Valley is there, that the parents down there are removing cell phones from their children. They don't want their kids working with technology. No calculator until after they're out of the 8th grade. No cell phones until they're teenagers. And I think kids need to do hands-on and using your head. And so that when somebody asks you, what's 5 times 9, they know it immediately. Not that they get out their calculator and have to do that. By that time, I mean, you've wasted some time as far as I'm concerned. I know a gal who, she can't do anything unless she has her calculator. And I think that's too bad, you know. And same thing with respect. I don't think that children have as much respect for adults. I'm not going to say that's true of all kids, but in schools or maybe in a store or any place else. And I think it's because in the 50s we didn't have you didn't get to go a lot of places. You had to stay home. Or kids today, from the time they're born, are in Walmart or someplace. You know, parents are taking their kids. We have working parents, and so there's the kids are either with a daycare or with a babysitter. So there's so many things that have changed that I can see. And then when the parents come home at night, well, they don't want to start disciplining their kids. You know, I'm sure they do, but I mean, you know, it's difficult. And then you also, there's money. There's a lot more money than there was. So they have all kinds of things. They have everything they want. I mean, kids today get snowmobiles for Christmas. You got a sled or one doll. So it's a whole different time in our culture. And
I was wondering, when you were growing up, did you have electricity on the farm?
when we grew up, we didn't have electricity until about the late 40s. And in our neighborhood, there were about 3 farms that hooked up to MDU, Montana Dakota Utilities. And we only had, one light bulb, that type of thing. We didn't have any fancy lights or anything. And we just had more or less the light bulb. Very few outlets, because you didn't have egg beaters or anything electric, no refrigerator, no electric stove. So there were very few outlets, and that's the way the house is still today, very few outlets, although I do have appliances. But
Do you remember what the first appliance you bought was?
my folks bought their first appliance, I think, right after the war. and that was a refrigerator and a deep freeze. And I think that was probably it for years. And then they got rid of their bottle gas and coal stove. It was a combination. And then they got their electric stove. And my mother did not like her electric stove compared to her bottle gas and her coal stove. She thought those made better bread than the electric one. She said the electric one dried it out. And the angel food cake too.
So you talked about listening to the radio. Is that all battery powered?
We had a battery radio. In fact, we did not have a radio, I don't think, until we probably moved to the farm that we are now. Because I remember on the farm that before we came to where we are now, that we wanted to hear the Joe Louis fight. And that was going to be on radio. And we had to walk to the neighbors across the prairie to get to their house and so we could listen to this boxing match. Well, by the time we got there, he had already knocked out the guy. So we turned around and went back home again. But so we didn't have a radio then. So it had to be where we live now that we finally got a radio. And we could only listen to that at night after all our homework was done. You did not turn on the radio, to listen to Lone Ranger or whoever was on. Nope, all the work, and that didn't mean just my homework. All three of us had to have it done. That was important. And they never complained about, you have too much homework to do. It was like, do you have it done? And then we did, at night, for entertainment, since we didn't have television, and we would play checkers, cards, marbles, and then in the summertime, if we had company, we'd go out and play softball. No matter if they were adults, everybody played softball. We'd walk to the neighbors and play softball.
Did you have relatives close by? Did you visit relatives like on Sunday after church?
On Sunday afternoons after church, we either would rest for the week, or we would go to uncles. We had two uncles. One uncle lived northwest of Hazelton, out on the Buttes. Another one lived southwest of here, west of Lytton, and they lived near the river. And when we would go out there, my dad and my uncle, they would probably just visit, talk about the grain, or even walk around into the grain. Us kids would walk out into the buttes with my cousin. Never once thought that there were rattlesnakes out there. Never did see one. If relatives, as my dad's relatives, of course, lived up by Cavaliers, so they only came once in a great while. We didn't get to see them. But when they came, they would stay for 3 days. We kids would have to give up our beds and sleep on the floor. We loved that. We didn't probably do much things with them as we did with my relatives that lived on my mother's side, that lived around here. We would always find something to do when they came, even if it was climbing up on the haystack, which we weren't supposed to do, because that was probably destroying the haystack, getting it all out of shape. But that's what you did. We even, on our own, we would find the old tires and climb in the inside of the tire, and then one would roll that tire down the road. But now when I think of that, that was crazy. But we thought it was fun, you know.
Did you have horses on your farm when you were growing up?
We had horses on our farm. They were work horses. And my mother never wanted the girls to learn to ride horse, because when she was growing up, that's what she had to do. And I think she felt that she didn't want us to become like she had to do it, all this stuff. So we never got to ride the horses, but we did have work horses. And my brother learned how to harness them and how to hook them up and do all those things. But my sister and I never did get to learn to do that. And I had always wished that I would have been able to ride a horse. But I guess she had her reasons.
When you look back over the years, what do you think, or how do you think the role of women has changed in agriculture from when you were a young kid to now you see people around you in the community?
Well, there are some women, I believe, that are still a great part of the agriculture and helping with the farming. My niece lives on the farm, and they have cattle as well as doing crops. So, I mean, she'll be out there helping taking care of the cattle. This last 2-3 years, they've been building fence. She's out there building a fence. They have one daughter and one son. The daughter is married and gone. The son is out of school and works for Green Iron. So that means at one time she couldn't wait till that son grew up, because he was a big help. But he went to school, now he's out working, so she's back to where she was, back helping with the cattle and being the gopher and so forth. There are other women who have gone on to college and have jobs, and so they're not necessarily helping. They probably help economically, maybe, to help. They maybe have the insurance they can cover for their family, which the family probably could not afford to do otherwise if they had to do it out of their own bank account. And then a lot of their children are in daycare, which they weren't before, the mother, and sometimes the parent took the kid with you out onto the hayfield, and you sat underneath the wagon or something, because you had to do work and still take care of the kids at the same time. Where today, that doesn't happen. Although I shouldn't say that, because I know of a family where the mother works during the day, and after work, when it's harvest time, she probably goes out and she takes over the combine. And then she might have to put a kid into the combine with her, But that's not general. So, but I know there are farmers where the wife is still out there helping. But yeah, but there's also the other side. And I don't know what the percentage is. I have no clue, but it's different.
Do you ever experience, see for yourself, that there might be some pushback from maybe even the older but males in the community about what the women's role might be in farming?
The men, you said?
The men, yeah.
I think today the men, they wouldn't probably push women out of the tractor, I don't think. I think that, although years ago, I think the men, depending how many children were in the family, and if there were men in the family, and if the men were older, they were the ones that did the heavy, hard work on the plowing and that type of thing. But today, with some of the equipment maybe women could handle, but I'm not so sure they could handle a lot of the equipment today because it is so complicated and big that even some of the older farmers don't even know if they want to get on that equipment because it's just outlandish. So, but as far as saying that men wouldn't want women out there, I don't think there is that attitude anymore. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know.